Good afternoon or good morning if you're still in a place where it's morning. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm the editor and VP of Streaming Media Magazine and the conference chair for Streaming Media West Connect. Normally, we'd all be gathering in Huntington Beach right now, but as we know, these times are anything but normal. So I'm coming to you from my home office in Wisconsin, looking out at the cold and rain and wishing I was in Huntington Beach. The upside of meeting virtually, of course, is that hopefully people who couldn't typically attend our in-person shows are able to attend and watch online. I also, I also want to point out that for this session, in addition to our speaker, we'll be joined by two interpreters, one who is interpreting what our speaker is saying for the audience, and one who will be interpreting what I say for the speaker. That said, I hope you get a chance to join us for additional sessions at Streaming Media West Connect this week. We're covering technical topics like WebRTC and live production, as well as big picture panels looking at sports and esports streaming, live streaming, advertising technology, and the OTT market from all sorts of perspectives. And I hope to see a lot of the same names pop up in any number of our sessions. And then things continue next week with the Content Delivery Summit, which happens on Monday, as well as several in-depth workshops from people like Jan Ozer and Robert Reinhardt talking about giving you deep dives into the technology behind streaming media. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank our Streaming Media West Connect Platinum sponsor, Limelight Networks. And here's a few words from Limelight Networks.
At Limelight, we're in the business of connecting people to exceptional digital experiences. Our real-time edge platform has launched and grown some of the largest video properties in the world. When there's a high-traffic industry event via the internet, the chances are we're helping deliver it. The difference? Limelight's global private network puts content and applications right next to your customers at the network edge. This result is the most dynamic real-time interactions, no matter where your customers are or what their business is. Like our network, we've also optimized our software stack to be fast, reliable, and secure. And our customers have unrestricted access to live regional technical support whenever it's needed. Limelight Networks has the capacity, the global footprint, and expert service worldwide needed to meet the growing demands for online content now and in the future.
I should note that Susie Rosen-Singleton's presentation is on behalf of the Federal Communications Commission, and any mention of sponsors or other private entities does not imply that the Commission endorses that entity. Also, as we move forward, if you do wish to submit any questions, please use the Q&A tab and submit the questions there, and I will relay those to our speaker. And after the presentation, if you want a copy of the slideshow, please email me, and I can send that to you as a PDF. Now, if you're delivering premium OTT content, chances are good that you need to use closed captioning. And even if you're not delivering premium OTT content, it's the right thing to do to make sure that your content is accessible to everyone who wants to watch it. Our next speaker, Susie Rosen-Singleton, is the Chief Disability Rights Office Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau representative for the Federal Communications Commission. Welcome, Susie.
Thank you so much, Eric. I'm really happy to be with everyone here today.
And Susie is going to walk through some of the recommendations and requirements that the FCC presents for closed captioning on multiple devices. And with that, I will pass the presentation over to Susie.
Well, thank you so much, Eric. And I look forward to answering any questions that you all have. And I hope that this will be an interactive and dynamic communication today discussion here. So as you can see from what Eric mentioned previously, it's really the right thing to do to ensure that user interfaces and video programming is accessible to the millions of Americans with disabilities and their families. You never know where they may want to watch that information. Maybe it's on or at a place where they can't have audio. So it really is nice to have captions as an option. We're seeing many, many more people using them. And it's driven by the market as well. So now you see that specifically the Federal Communications Commission We do have other possible laws that could apply to the accessibility of video programming and user interfaces that are regulated by the Department of Justice, for example, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or maybe local state laws may apply as well. So I did want to emphasize that I'm only speaking for my agency, and that is the Federal Communications Commission. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and proceed with the next slide. Please move to the next slide. As you can see, my office is the Disability Rights Office, and it really focuses on 3 main areas. We're only going to be discussing video programming today with you all, but I do want you to know the scope of my office. The first is video programming. The second is emergency. Well, let me back up a bit here. Video programming, we do regulations around audio descriptions, which helps information be shown on television and ensure that it is accessible to people who are blind or visually impaired. We regulate captioning for television and for the internet. We also regulate the user interface aspect of watching video programming, whether it be on a tablet or a set-top box or any device that plays back video. The second area we have is emergency communications. That is ensuring that people with disabilities can call 911 or be notified if there is an emergency in that general area. The third area is modern communication, which includes telephone communications primarily, but not only that. It also includes relay services for people who need to communicate through an interpreter or through text. Then that is voice to the hearing party on the other end, and that's relay services. We do have advanced communication services. I'll discuss that a bit more later, because we do have gaming for online gaming. And that is where people are able to communicate with one another, and that's when we do have some rules around accessibility for that case. We also have hearing aid compatibility and so forth. So really the Disability Rights Office, their mission is to ensure that people with disabilities can access communications and video programming. And these all overlap, all 3 of these sections overlap to a certain extent. For example, there may be emergency communications on television. So that overlaps 2 different areas there as well, just to provide you a general idea. I just want to pause here to be sure there are no questions.
No questions?
Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide, please. So now, this may look a bit rudimentary for you, but I do want to emphasize the important point here, and that is that we are making progress at rocket speed here. And really, it is so critical that accessibility is baked in at the beginning, because once the rocket launches, you're not seeing it come back anytime soon. So it really is important that we keep in mind that it takes very little to bake it in at the beginning, as opposed to retroactively trying to fix it. So with that in mind, I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. I'll dive in a bit more into the technological information here. But I do want you to know that this is language from our rules, but I've tried to shorten it down to the extent that to the germane points here. CFR 79.4, you will see that we have rules around captioning of video programming delivered using IP, Internet Protocol. So now to back up just a little bit, the FCC does require 100% captioning of televised information, but we have a much more narrow reach for IP Internet Protocol captioning. And that is because we have to follow the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, which is also called the CVAA. It specifically says within that law that Congress passed that we can only touch what's already been shown on television. So that is the number one point here. If it was shown on television in the United States with captioning, then it must be captioned if it's full length regardless. Doesn't matter which website it's on. However, if it is a video clip, we have even more narrow oversight. If the video programming distributor or the provider produces that on television in the United States with captioning, then it must be captioned on their own website, not on a third-party website or app. So for example, YouTube or Facebook. There are a lot of stations that may post video clips there, but they're not covered by our rules, unfortunately. Many of them, not all of them, tend to be captioned. And the third point here is consumer-generated media. It's not shown on television and it is exempt from our rules. Next slide, please. I do want to emphasize this is an important point. The CVAA and our rules emphasize that it is not about whether or not it's been shown on IP or on the internet, but it's actually about if it was IP delivered. So for example, programming may be delivered through Internet Protocol using a private network. But that is not internet programming then, because it is not available on the internet. Instead, it is delivered through IP. So that would be covered by our rules. So thinking about it a little bit, we cover certain closed systems. So for example, an airport, excuse the interpreter. An airport may have their own closed system for video programming. And that's where we still have coverage because it was delivered through IP. So keep that in mind. It's not necessarily the test of whether or not it's online, but how the programming was delivered to your device. Okay, next slide, please. So now with compliance dates. I'm sorry this seems a little bit Byzantine, but this is our rules. And many of those dates have already passed a while ago. But it is important to know that if we are requiring captioning, we have to have that program shown on television on or after those dates listed. So covered full-length video programming has to be shown after a certain date. You can see all of the deadlines listed there. And who needs to prove that is the station, not the consumer. It is the video programming distributor that needs to show this. They need to prove that. So now secondly, oh, and by the way, the PowerPoint will not be available for you to take back to it will be available for you to take back so you can take a look at it again later in more depth. Programming applies only to full-length programming. Archived applies only to full-length programming. So for example, if you have a video in your library, in your IP library, and it's then shown on TV later. So for instance, I Love Lucy, a show from a while ago. If it's shown on TV recently, then you have 15 days to put the captions on your video. And that does not apply for video clips. And here we do have the dates for compliance for all of those. We used to have different compliance dates for different kinds of video clips, but now all of those times have passed a few years ago. So now if companies feel that it is economically burdensome, then they can file for a waiver petition with us, with the FCC. But I do want to let you know that we have not gotten one since 2012 when we implemented that order. And that's probably because the only time that you have to caption is when it's already captioned on television. So the caption files should already be there when it's transferred over to the internet. So it's a little bit different from creating your own files. It's a bit of a different burden. It may be a technological burden, but not an economic burden. Okay, next slide, please. So now there are two parties that work together to make sure that captioning works for internet IP delivered programming. The first is video programming owners. And that's any person who, or entity, that either licenses the video programming to a video programming distributor, which is also called a VPD, or a video programming provider, which is a VPP, that makes the video programming available directly to the end user through a distribution method that uses Internet Protocol. Or the second is that the VPD acts and also, or the VPP, and also possesses the right to license the video programming to a VPD or VPP that makes video programming available to the end user through a distribution method that uses IP. So basically, the person who has the license. VPDs or VPPs is defined as any person or entity that makes available directly to the end user video programming through a distribution method that uses IP. Now why do I say VPD or VPP? They're pretty much the same thing. The CVAA, the law that authorizes our regulations in this topic, uses two separate terms. So we had to take that into our rules. And our rules define them identically. So with that in mind, you can use them interchangeably. Okay, so those two parties are key to this process. And you, the audience, may be the members of some of these categories here. Okay, moving on to the next slide, please.
Now you're going to hear a different voice speaking for me, but this is still Susie speaking. Okay, so now I'm going to be focusing on the obligations of these two groups. It's a really important point because that is how captioning can be assured for IP delivered programming. First, for VPOs, the first obligation is to send the program files to VPDs and VPPs with captions that have at least the same quality as the televised captions provided for that same programming. if a VPO provides captions to a VPD or a VPP using the what's called the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers timed text format, which is SMPTE, ST. And then the VPO has fulfilled its obligation to deliver the captions in an acceptable format. And the parties may agree upon some alternative technical format for the delivery of captions as well. The second obligation for VPOs is to ensure that the VPD and the VPP have some understanding of the obligation to identify which video programs are subject to the Commission's captioning rules. So they need to collaborate in order to have that kind of mechanism in place. So that's the two obligations for VPOs. The next slide, if we go to the next slide, is about VPDs. Now, for VPDs and VPPs, it's a little bit more complicated here because they're further down the distribution chain and then closer to the end user delivery. First, they have to enable the pass-through of captions to the end user, maintaining the quality of the captions that were provided by the VPO. Some people worry about broadband connection quality and how that might impact the quality of captions. We also do consider those as well when we receive complaints on this topic. The second obligation is to agree upon a mechanism for the VPO to inform a distributor that there is something that was provided that is subject to the Commission's captioning rules. And a VPD or VPP can rely in good faith on a certification by VPO that the video programming need not be captioned if such certification includes a clear and concise explanation of why captioning is not required. For example, it's exempt because it's from a network that is within its first 4 years of existence, or there's 13 different categorical exemptions that already exist in our 79.1 rules, which covers televised captioning. I see a question. Let me see. So there's a question about the FCC's regulations. Sort of generally, and how often they are updated. Okay, I'm happy to quickly answer that. We do continue to update our rules depending on petitions that may be filed with us, asking us for rulemaking. We did have a few outstanding issues that have since been resolved. For example, we had an outstanding issue about video clips on third-party websites. And at this time, we have not moved forward with a proceeding on that issue. It often depends on the priorities of the agency. Right now, we're focusing a lot more on telecommunications relay services, or TRS. But we do continue to update our agenda and adjust our agenda. I think that's true for most agendas, depending on the administration's priorities. Often, it's probably not often that the rules are modified. However, we do use our complaint system to clarify interpretations of the rules. But the rules generally stay until we release a notice of proposed rulemaking, because we have Administrative Procedures Act that we are subject to, that we must have fair notice to the public about any proposed changes to our rules before we actually implement them. So I'm going to go back to the obligations of the VPDs and VPPs. So the certification is certainly an option, but you have to have it available if the FCC happens to contact you about any consumer complaints. then we need to be able to get a copy of that certification to understand that you are relying on that in good faith. The last obligation is to make sure that your website it is to make available contact information to the end user for the receipt and handling of written closed captioning complaints about violations of this section, which is 79.4. And that contact information required for written complaints must include a name of an individual with primary responsibility for IP captioning issues. And who has the authority then to ensure compliance. The information must be current. It must be updated within 10 days of any changes. Next slide, please. So apps, plugins, and devices. Now, if you are a VPD or a VPP, and you provide an app, a plugin, or a device for the purpose of delivering video programming, it must comply with some additional obligations to ensure that the apparatus has a specific technical capability and interconnection, which is the capability of conveying information to allow for the display of closed captions. Next slide, please. And I'm going to expand a little bit on what that means. The requirements for apparatus are listed here, must meet certain technical capabilities. The presentation must be able to display and see closed captioning, character color, character opacity, character size, fonts, captioning background, color and opacity, the character edge attributes, caption window color, language, preview and setting retention, and all of that. Those are all requirements unless you are using the SMPTE TT safe harbor standard. In that case, you do not have to represent that you meet each of these specific requirements if you can certify that you are using SMPTE time text. Next slide, please. So we're shifting gears a little bit here on this next slide. We're focusing more on manufacturers of equipment that is used for the streaming of media. Now, before I switch over there, I know that we're in a webinar format, but I want to check in to see if there are any questions about this previous section, talking about 79.4 rules that focuses on streaming media. You may be wondering about audio description requirements. In this case, there are none for streaming media. But fortunately, as you've seen from, as I'm sure you know, it is certainly the right thing to do. So you may be seeing lots of streaming media that is already presented with audio description. An example of that is, and I certainly don't want to point out any or endorse anyone, but I will say Amazon, for example, has been doing that. They have a library full of titles that are included with audio description. And I believe that Hulu and some of the other major companies like Hulu, Netflix have libraries of content with audio description, which is really outstanding because it really is so important to be able to have access for people who otherwise would be excluded. Eric, are there some questions?
There is one question. This comes from Steve Holmes. If a video programming owner, VPO, were to post a full length, let's say it's a 45-minute Sunday service, after that fact on VOD, would that church need to caption the VOD content, even if the edited 30-minute version for TV were slightly different? Usually this question applies to clips coming from content that was of longer duration and had aired on TV. This instance has longer content playing online, but wouldn't be able to simply utilize the already captioned content that aired on TV.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I just want to make sure that I understand it right. The video programming was shown first on the internet, and then was shown subsequently on TV in a shorter version.
Yes.
So then they would have to go back to caption the full version. That is not the case. Usually what happens is if it is full length and shown in full length on television at some later time, then you would have to trigger that requirement to caption within 15 days for that same content on the internet. That's an archival requirement that only applies for full length programming. The question is, was the televised clip substantially similar? Because if you shave 1 or 2 minutes off, that doesn't necessarily relieve you of the obligation to caption it. So we need to have some factual assessment as to whether that that met that determination.
He has a follow-up saying, so they wouldn't have to live caption when the service was online to start with prior to the TV broadcast.
Live captions. I'm not sure I understand the question. So the internet provider would not have to live caption while it was being shown on television? Or is it a different company or station? Is that what's meant by that? Let me take a look and see if it's actually in the chat.
No, it's in the Q&A tab. And here Steve says the TV broadcast is a week delayed from the online service.
So if it is full length and substantially, that is, then yes, you would have to caption it on the internet if it is the same. It doesn't matter if you're a third-party website. Okay.
Okay, we have one other question that's in the Q&A. How many days or hours do broadcasters have to get video clip captions posted on the web for video clips that are excerpted from broadcast video that aired with captions? So it sounds like, how long do the broadcasters have to get those captions posted on the web for excerpts from broadcast video that aired with captions?
Oh, for clips. I would have to look to make sure, but at least my understanding is that if it has been on television, then you must have it captioned if it is on your own website. And there isn't any delay allowable in that case.
Okay, one last follow-up. If there's any area that speaks, this is the previous question about the church services that are online first and then TV. If there's any area that speaks to this in more detail in the regulations, that would be great, please. Can you refer him to any specific regulations that he should be looking at?
Sure, it's 79.4. And that's Title 47, Part 79 in the Code of Federal Regulations.
Okay, thank you.
And I do also want to add that the last slide here has a list of resources for you, and you'll see that the Disability Rights Office's webpage has links to all the relevant rules, compliance guides, items that we have released, reports and orders, etc., at fcc.gov/accessibility. All right, so with that, let's get back to user interfaces. In general, video devices of all sizes must provide closed captioning, audio description, and emergency access, if achievable. And easy access must be provided to closed captioning and video description. Audio and video description are used a bit interchangeably there. In fact, we have a rulemaking proceeding that has asked the public about how folks feel about the use of audio description versus video description. It seems like the prevailing use is audio description, just for the record. But anyway, if somebody needs to turn that feature, that function on, it must be easy through something comparable to a button, key, or icon. User interfaces also must be accessible if achievable. People who are blind or visually impaired must be able to access the on-screen text menus and programming guides. Compliance may be through the use of software, peripheral device, or some other solution, and must be provided free to the requesting individual within a reasonable amount of time. Next slide, please. So what are the additional capabilities that must be available for user interfaces? It's a bit separate from the 79.4 rules. This is user interfaces which are part of the 79.103 through 107. The following functions, if built into the device and provided as an on-screen text menu or via some other visual indicator, must be audibly accessible to individuals who are blind or visually impaired if achievable. And this is a whole host of features here, including power on and off, volume adjustment or muting, channel and program selection, display of channel and program information, setup options, closed captioning control and display options, audio description control, current configuration information, playback controls like play, pause, rewind, fast forward, stop, and record, and input source selection. And now you will see that the market has come up with more and more user interface options using your eye to track to be able to find certain features that you want to turn on or off. So keep that in mind when you're considering devices and how you're keeping up with the market and what the best practices are. These are so many ways now to accommodate people with disabilities. Next slide. This has to do with how you engage with your customers. We do have rules that require the device manufacturers and subscription television service providers must provide information on their website about the following: the availability of accessible devices, the person, office, or entity who can answer questions about the availability of accessible devices, and how to activate and use accessibility features or where such information can be found. If requested, they must also provide information and documentation like user guides in an accessible format. As you know, what good is accessibility if you can't even get access to understand how to use it? There's usability and then there's accessibility that are along those same points. It's about the usability of the product. And the final item here is the process for requesting and obtaining an accessible device must take about the same amount of time and cannot be more burdensome than the way that other consumers obtain similar devices. That's an important point because sometimes for set-top boxes, for example, there are some that are simply not accessible to people who are blind. So there are upgraded set-top boxes that are available that are accessible, but providers are not allowed to charge extra for such set-top boxes when they're being provided for accessibility purposes to their consumers. Okay, next slide, please.
I'm wondering if anyone knows if streaming video games, so I'm not sure if your audience here has anyone who is involved in the gaming industry, but that is something that seems that it is available in every household now, especially during the pandemic when we have to stay at home. So actually, yes. If the content is part of advanced communication services, and the question we would ask is, can people communicate with each other by voice or text when they're using the video game software? And if so, then yes, it is considered communication services and is covered by our rules and must be made accessible. We've provided a waiver that expired in 2017, December 2017. So since 2018, gaming is supposed to be accessible for certain vendors that include communication. I thought that would be interesting, given that that the FCC never envisioned being involved within gaming. But it is becoming a major part of our lives. People meet other people through that method. And so if it is connected to communications, we will be there. All right, next slide, please. This is, I believe, we're close to the last slide here. So before I go into this, I would like to see if there is anything about the previous content, any questions about the previous content.
There aren't any questions at the moment from the audience, but let's give them a second to chime in if they have any. I have a question. I'm wondering, are there any requirements in terms of accuracy, the percentage accuracy that is acceptable for closed captioning and other accessibility services under these guidelines?
Yes, thank you. That is a very important question, because what's the point of having captions if you can't read it? So the FCC does have quality captioning standards that applies to televised programming. And the 4 tenets include placement, ensuring that it does not cover any important information on the screen, ensuring that it is synchronized with the speaker, ensuring that it is complete, that it does not go off the edge of the screen or it is not cut off by a commercial. And lastly, and probably not least, definitely not least, is accuracy, ensuring that it is verbatim. You cannot have deletions. Even if there are swear words, you are not able to bleep it out unless it is bleeped audibly as well. You need to match the audio. So if it's a song lyrics or they must be captioned, we have ordered, and that is required, that captions include everything, including background noises, even fillers like or that needs to be captioned if it is necessary to understand the content and to provide people who don't hear the same access to that information. But now going over to IP, the obligation is to ensure that you have the same quality. And the reason there are no standards for IP is because the captions are meant to be passed along within that file. And sometimes when you have live captioning, you will have errors. And we have lenient standards, more lenient anyway, for live programming or near live programming, or for certain situations where the captioning was out, there was an outage of some sort, different reasons. So we are looking at that, but that is a standard to ensure that captioning is usable and is able to benefit the population. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. We have
Sure.
a couple more questions in the Q&A. The next one has to do with internal business communications. Does the FCC provide any similar guidelines for captioning of content when it is a business using streaming video to communicate with its own employees? If not, do you envision guidelines in the future, or is the FCC only focused on consumers?
So are we talking about best practices for captioning? Because we do have that. Yes, we do. So if you look at part 79, that will include 79.1, which has an extensive list of best practices for vendors, for broadcasters, and for the captioners themselves, so that they can try to ensure standards within their captioning. So for example, a best practice is to ask ahead of time for the script so that you can have complicated names, make sure that they're spelled correctly. So we do have that information available in our rules, in our compliance guides, and in our consumer guides as well. And in ASL, we also have videos in ASL explaining these. We have all kinds of resources available on our website.
All right, thank you. We have one more question in the Q&A. Do you think that audio descriptions for people with visual impairment will become mandated? If so, can you predict how many years away this rulemaking might be?
I need to pull out my crystal ball here to give an answer to that question. But I do have to say that we are simply regulators working within the boundaries that are given to us by Congress. So a law needs to be passed in order to authorize the capability to regulate for internet programming with regards to audio descriptions. However, we have seen great industry cooperation, and they do see the benefit of making that programming available. So I think that's where the market can drive this. And I think it's going to happen sooner rather than later. It's already happening, actually. But we do keep that in mind. And it's really up to Congress to instruct us about how we can draft our regulations within the scope and so forth.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Another question.
Sure.
Is there a distinction with this as it pertains to live IP streamed media? You mentioned earlier that there's a little bit of forgiveness for certain these tenets and accuracy in live streamed media, but since live streamed media often tends to have inaccuracies, is there guidance then for recaptioning for VOD delivery of the versions of the VOD versions of what just streamed live?
So streaming, it was streamed live first, or was it televised first? Which happened first?
Streamed.
Okay, so if it was streamed live with captions, and then it was shown on television, I don't think we have ever required that the streamers recaption, because we do have a
De minimis.
we have a de minimis exemption. So if there are errors, if it was live, it really would depend, because many times programming becomes stale. And we really do not want to require captions in that regard. So again, it depends on the facts of the case.
Right, and this person did follow up and say this would not be delivered on television at any point.
Oh, and then our rules don't cover it.
Okay. All right.
Thank you for that clarification.
We have another question asking if, well, it's a fairly broad one. What are current requirements for broadcast and cablecast programmers? I wanted to put that question out there because in case I'm misinterpreting it, it seems like that may have been what your entire presentation was just about. But, you know, if you have any response to that and could share it.
What are the obligations for broadcasters? I mean, yes, maybe you can follow up with more clarification, exactly what kind of information you're looking for.
Okay, we'll see if there's a follow-up. There are no additional questions at this point, so maybe return to your slide, and then if he follows up with clarification, we can grab that question again.
Sure, yes. Okay. And again, our website has tons of information, so please feel free to visit the website and reach out to us if you see any information that you would like further clarification on. I did want to include this slide because we want to let you know that we are your resource as well. We're looking for opportunities to engage with everyone. And these are our initiatives to engage. We're really proud to say that the Disability Advisory Committee is probably the first in government to have a diverse stakeholders coming together to discuss different issues about accessibility. Our next meeting is on October 14th, and you can watch it live on fcc.gov. We talk about captioning. We talk about a variety of different issues. The two recommendations that are coming up on October 14th happen to be about live captioning and best practices for stations, for news stations and news programming, and about audio descriptions and quality standards. There are currently none. So that body has developed some best practices. The Chairman's Awards for Advancement in Accessibility, that will be happening on October 8th. We will recognize people who really have contributed to accessibility, to communications, telecommunications. And we have this annually, but this is the first year that we'll be recognizing only individuals. But this is one effort in trying to encourage the market to be innovative, because there's so much that can be done for persons with disabilities. So for example, people who are deaf-blind, they're still trying to get access to streaming media. They're hoping for ways to maybe be able to connect their refreshable Braille displays to be able to get captioning on their refreshable Braille displays, and then would be able to access some televised programming or internet programming. So we need innovation to make that a possibility. We have an accessibility clearinghouse to expand for people, tell people where to go for reaching out to a specific person. So for instance, if people have cognitive disabilities or hearing disabilities, they can reach out and find a contact person at that location. We also have the American Sign Language Video Library. Lots of people rely upon sign language as their first language, and it helps to provide our information in an accessible way. Rules are so technical, as you've seen from my previous slides here today. We also have a listserv, which we would welcome you to sign up for. The next slide will have that information listed. It is accessinfo@fcc.gov. We send out information about disability-related activities and events. So for example, tomorrow, we will have an item coming up for vote about Internet Protocol Caption Telephone Service. We have roundtables and forums. They're now done virtually, but they're still ongoing. Social media, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and I think Twitter as well, but I'm not sure. ASL Consumer Line Services, we are really proud to say that we are the first in government to establish a phone line so that people like me can call directly in and sign with an agent using ASL to file a complaint and ask questions. Finally, we have consumer and small business guides so that we can help people understand what we require in plain English. Next slide, please. So we have arrived at our last slide. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And thank you for making a difference. I would like to close, but first I want to see if some closing remarks. But first I want to see if there's anything else, any more questions?
Nope, no more questions.
Okay, well, thank you for putting in that URL. Okay, I guess to close out, I just want to say a big thank you to Eric for making this opportunity possible for us at the FCC to come and meet with this audience today. Please know that we are here for all of you, and we look forward to continuing to collaborate. Tomorrow will bring even more technology and so forth, that we are all in this together to ensure that technology is accessible. Because we're all just temporarily able-bodied, which means we all will have a disability someday. So that's where you will directly benefit as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Susie. Thank you to the interpreters. This was a terrific presentation. Again, if anyone watching wants to get a copy of the PowerPoint, I can create a PDF version of that and send it out. You just email me. My email was in the chat, and I'm guessing Steve can put it in the chat again right now. Thanks to Steve for running the technical side of things. And thanks again to all of you for joining and having so many great questions. We also want to give one more final thanks to our platinum sponsor, Limelight Networks, for sponsoring all of Streaming Media West Connect. We've got another session coming up in about an hour looking at personalized OTT services. And so we hope we'll see some of you there. Thanks again.